Guys, welcome. It's Nick here from Fishtails. I've got some incredible news to share with you guys. We are so excited for this new project. Behind the scenes, the team and I, we've been working incredibly hard to bring a new avenue to Fishtails, a way that we can introduce you and show you the backside of the fishing industry in South Africa as a whole. We're going to kick it off with a bang with a couple of awesome YouTube videos where we're going to be exploring the historical fishing in and around South Africa, not just from a commercial or charter-based avenue, but recreational angling, and again, not just from boats, but from land-based. We're going to be entertaining and chatting to some absolute iconic legends in this industry. We are so excited for this and we cannot wait to share this with you. Please enjoy the video, give us a like, give us a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, enjoy it. If you guys enjoy this content, let us know and we're going to just run with this and share as much of this as we possibly can with you. This is all about us sharing our passion and passion of others with those that don't necessarily have the opportunity to go out there and meet these people. So we're going to bring it to you. Uncle Brian Cohen, one of the last living legends that was able to target and harvest the giant bluefin that were caught in Fisherman Bay. Yep, Fisherman Bay. It is unbelievable. We sincerely appreciate the fact that you've given us this time to share this with us, because there's whilst your goal since we've been talking has been to share this with the youngsters and the up and coming generation. I don't think you realize from our side how many kids are actually out here going, sorry, what? There was how many bluefin? How big were these things? We from our side have kept it quite quiet because we wanted to be the first to steal this opportunity from you to share it. And the whole goal of this is we want to share it to the next generation, because we feel like, as you've said, and we've realized, we're all getting older, and at some point somebody has to carry these stories and legacies on. So with that in mind, we want to chat to you about these big bluefin, because both Johan and I, as avid fishermen, and so many others would love to be a part of this history, and we want to ask a couple of questions and share this with everybody. So how did you guys figure out that these things were here? How did you?
Well, it's an interesting story, but what you say is something which is very close to my heart. I mean, as I've said before, by some by some kind of aging process, everybody's passed on. And I seem to be, I think there's probably one other that I know about, guy who's around still, who actually caught bluefin in Fisherman. And it's so sad, because the actual saga of the giant bluefin in Fisherman started in 1963 odd, and it went on for 9 years. And to look at Fisherman Bay as it is today, it's a beautiful bay and it's wonderful for swimming for the bathers, but to imagine that these giant bluefin were swimming around sort of a couple of 100 meters from the swim is quite ridiculous. So today, so often, youngsters who all look and talk to me about the bluefin and ask to see pictures, Ski Boat magazine ran a couple of articles on them, and they say to me, well, we can't believe it's possible. Surely this couldn't have happened. And of course, with the advent of this TV program, Wicked Tuna, which made the younger generation also aware of the giant bluefin and everybody, to say to them this wicked, I said, well, you guys, believe me if I tell you wicked tuna happened right here on your doorstep. And they say to me, well, goodness gracious, it's only 10 in the morning, why don't you have another triple gin and tonic? Well, obviously, you can't expect us to believe that. So what you say is absolutely correct. I'm fortunate to still be around. I'm still kicking, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here. But I feel so strongly that the giant bluefin story of Fisherman Bay is so much part of the South African angling history that these stories have got to be told for posterity. They must be remembered, and specifically for the younger generation, because these youngsters have got to know what actually happened 100%. In Fisherman Bay. It's all very well for the wealthy guys to say, we went over to Bimini or to the Bahamas or to Massachusetts and we caught a 6 or 7, which is a great feat. And no, I'm not.
Absolutely,
But to actually catch a giant bluefin right on our doorstep in Fisherman, to me, You know, that was the number one prize.
That's pretty much the sum total of what
Yeah.
dreams are made of, right there.
Yeah,
I mean,
and that's what I was so thrilled to have been, and so privileged to have been part of for so long, for nearly 9 years.
so how did you guys
Fine.
discover them? How
Yeah.
did you figure out that they were
Okay,
here?
well, for many, many years, my dad was a very well-known sports fisherman. He had a boat called Sally in Simonstown, and he was always part of the catching of yellowfin tuna. They never used to go past the bellows, but
Yeah.
they always caught 10, 15, 20 yellowfin. In those days, they didn't have to go very far. And he was very much involved. He was an attorney in Simonstown. So he was very much involved with the commercial fishing fraternity, which in Simonstown in those days, the Malay fishermen was quite substantial, as well as Cork Bay, which is 20 times bigger than it is today. And many, many stories were told always of them going into Fisher Bay, the Malay fishermen, commercial, catching chokka and mackerel before going to fish for cob or geelbeek or whatever, and being broken up by these giant bluefin, which would come under the boat when they're pulling in the chokka, and the bluefin, of course, would come and grab it and just go off, and they'd see these huge big fin. Always told stories, you know, and they put out the old days bloodlines and hand lines, and of course everybody got broken up. Nobody ever succeeded. And apart from that, there were several trek fishermen from Strandfontein right down to Simon's who occasionally in a trek net had got a bluefin in the net and brought it in.
What?
Yeah, so it was very little known about it, but there was, I think, 3 or 4 were caught in nets over that period of time, and they didn't know about them except they were huge, big tunny. They didn't even know what a bluefin was. Moose groot tunnies, you know, and so we knew they were around.
Okay.
You know, and of course the other factor is the fishermen at Roykrans, the spinnermen, always used to talk about having the vantage point where they would obviously spin for yellowtail and catching yellowfin too there. Often saw these giant bluefin coming past in shoals because they could see them on the surface, which the bluefin, and they always talked about, oh, we've seen bluefin, and for many years they always talked about this. So we always knew they were around, but we never ever could think about catching one commercially on the rod and reel. Then one day I was a youngster. I was about 14, not even, 14 probably. We were going to go on my dad's boat, Lamorva, to catch geelbeek, which were running at, we called it Smithwinkle Bay. There was a spot there we called Slatel. I don't know if they still call it that. And if the moon was right, at 6 in the evening, you had to be there at the sunset, the geelbeek would come on the bite. And it was nothing for us to catch 30, 40 beautiful geelbeek. So, you know, those days, of course, are long gone. But anyway, so Saturday, we're going first to Fisher Bay, like the commercials did, to catch chokka and mackerel. And then that would be about lunchtime, just after lunch. And then at 4 o'clock, pull up the anchor and head for Smiths, which was a 2-hour trip for us those days. We only did about 10 knots. So sure enough, I was there. A school pal of mine was there. I was only in standard 7, I think, then. And my dad was there, and he had a friend. And it was going to be some bait fish from Hoek, and go hopefully catch a few geelbeek as the sun set at Smiths. So everything was fine. So we went into Hoek on Lamorva, and the mackerel and chokka, as usual, were plentiful. Those days you could fill a boat up with them. And we caught as much as we needed. And about 3:45, 3:30, I think it was, no, a bit earlier, about 2-ish, I think. My dad said, okay, guys, we've got enough bait. Let's tidy up and let's go. Head for, so fine. So we went to the back. My dad said, clean the bait boards, because, you know, we had bait boards on the boat where we chopped to the, as I was cleaning, I said, good God, I said, there's a huge shark just come up under the boat. It's taking, and my dad said, where? We came rushing. He said, that's not a shark. He said, it's a bloody tunny, it's a tuna. I said, don't be ridiculous. He said, it's a tuna. And he called his pal, quickly threw more. We quickly got out some of the fish that we caught and cut them up. And sure enough, it was a giant bluefin. And this thing was cruising quietly under the boat. Well, we'd never, ever experienced this before. So straight away I said, Dad, come on, let's try and hook it. He said, we can't, we haven't got. I said, let's try. So he said, all right, tell you what I'll do. And he ran inside and he got one of the tunny rods out, with a feather hanging still on. You know, those days we used feathers. We didn't use these fancy things today. And he said, well, I don't know. It had a wire trace of about 2 meters on. So he took the feather, he pulled it about 1 meter up the trace, and he tied a knot so it wouldn't slip down. And the hook was then open, and he hooked a mackerel in, and he threw it over. And he said, well, let's try a Jesus, it hadn't even touched the water. Woof! And the thing went past. Poor Dad was hanging onto the bloody rod. It was a 12 O's. It was a decent tunny rod. Those days we used 12 O's out of Cape Point. And he said, well, what do we do now? He said, pull the bloody anchor up, because we were at anchor, obviously. So we said, how the hell do we pull? My dad said, just try and pull the anchor up. And he was hanging in the corner, and this reel was screaming. I still to this day remember it so well. And old Norman was the one guy there, and the two other chaps, and myself. Now, it was a mammoth task. We'd have winches, and then we had to pull the boat, and then we had to pull it up. Eventually, we got the anchor up, and I went back, and there was my dad stuck, also the kettle in the back, under the... And by some miracle, the line had, where there was no line left, there was just the spool.
That bakelite spool rocking.
But it still hung tight. It didn't snap. My dad said, come astern, get the boat. I'd never even maneuvered the boat before. I'd never done it, you know. And we had gears, those. Put it astern and come astern. So we started coming astern, and he said, now rev the thing. And I was revving, and the smoke was flying. And my dad's now winding, but of course it was all slack. So that was the end of the fish, we thought, but it wasn't. He got back about 100 meters of line, and suddenly it was slonned. You know, everything went wrong. I mean, technically you could never. We should have lost it. A long story, the story of that giant bluefin. My dad, eventually we got 200-300 yards back, and he got into the chair, and we helped him, and he was trying. He said, oh, well, we'll never get this in, but we'll try. And the next thing, it was almighty bang, and the bloody steering cable snapped, which was the cable where those days the steering was on stainless steel cable. So there was no steering. So we didn't know what the hell to do then. So my dad said, look, said to Norman, take the rod, you hold the rod, I'm going to have to go and rig up a jury rig. And those days we had a place at the back of the boat like a tiller. Although you could use the main steering, the tiller at the back was a reserve. So he managed to rig all of that up. So running between that, back to the rod, Norman trying to wind, me helping him wind, the fish going off again. My dad then, the steering thing, when it snapped, hit him on the side. The blood was pouring down. It was like a Faulty Towers comedy show. And this went on for about 4 or 5 hours. And we were all clapped. We didn't know what to do. My dad said, look, the line's nearly all in. And the next thing I said, there it is. And what had happened, this bluefin, with all the shenanigans going on, had literally drowned. And it came up out of the water like a huge, big, giant barrel, floating stone dead. And I'll never forget it. The funniest thing, because we didn't know what to do. We got the thing right to the boat, and my dad said, gaff it. And I had the little chocker jig gaff that I used to jig chop, and I leaned over the 700-pound blue, and I stuck this little chocker jig in, but fortunately it was stone dead. Anyway, that was the first bluefin ever caught in Fisherman Bay. Of course, it couldn't qualify for any records. It weighed 702 pounds. And as I say, it was about a 5-hour fight, and my dad must take all the credit, but he couldn't claim because we were all winding and And yeah, so you asked me how it began. That's how it began. The Hare brothers on Speranza in Cork Bay, very well known, wonderful people, great fishermen. We were stuck. We couldn't get the fish. We radioed them. They had a radio at their home, the Hermitage in Cork Bay. And we said, look, we're fighting a giant tunny. We need help. The steering's gone, and we don't know what's going on. The next thing, the Speranza came herring out with Vincent and Des, and they came and stood by and realized we'd managed to, and they were so excited. They then carried on, said, right, we're going to try for one. But they didn't know anything about anchoring or live baiting, but they knew about trolling a mackerel. So that we threw them a few mackerel, and within 10 minutes they were into a bluefin again, of us of us landing our one. And they got one of 440 pounds that same day. So those were the first 2 official bluefin caught in Fisherman Bay. But if you want to get technical, the first bluefin caught on rod and reel in False Bay was caught off the quarry from a boat called Bluebird, which belonged to David Sussman. And Mike Stott and David, who fished overseas for giant bluefin regularly, had a lot of experience of it. And they also had the reports of bluefin being seen. And they trolled a bait off Glenkin Quarry, and they got a strike on the troll, and they landed the first official bluefin, but not in Fisherman Bay off Glenk. It was about 440 pounds.
Jeepers. Yeah. Those are some seriously impressive fish. I mean, and to think that they were just roaming around here. And so, after you guys discovered these things, I mean, surely the tackle must have evolved. The sort of tackle that you used, and what boats were you guys using back in those days? I mean, what you're saying now, the steering. I mean,
Yeah, well, we had the conventional type fishing boats then. They were all 35-foot, 40-foot type class boats. There were boats you think about, Lamorva, Bluebird, Norseman. Those were all Simonstown boats.
was Bluefin around at that stage? The boat Bluefin?
No.
The
I'm talking about another Bluefin. Another Bluefin. You're thinking of the... No, the Bluefin boat. There were 2 or 3 different boats.
Oh, really?
Bluefin, yeah.
And Speranza?
Speranza came out as a Renata Levy's first design in South Africa.
Okay.
Brought out by the Head Brothers, the design and built by the Head Brothers in their factory in Woodstock. And she was the first RL36 planing hull, which would exceed 20 knots, which was completely new to us and absolutely marvelous because we couldn't, our fishing boats were all 8-10 knots maximum. And all of a sudden Speranza came on the scene, cruising 24, 25 knots. I mean, we were all chugging our way to the point, normally 2.5 hours, and Speranza would come screaming past, all sitting there in deck chairs having coffee, and we weren't even past Miller's Point. So we used to get bloody pissed off with them. But that was the beginning of the whole new.
Would you say that whole design that the Hair Brothers brought out and Speranza did that change the fishery?
The Speranza was called a monohydrant design, designed by Renata Levy, a famous international designer, and she was the forerunner for my boat, which became very well known here, which was a Renata Levy, but not monohydrant. It was a deep V.
Okay.
And we put in 600 horsepower, which was a huge amount of power for a boat of 36 foot. And she was built by Thiessens in Neisner. And she came after Speranza, also by the same designer. And that also introduced a whole different concept to the boats in Simonstown. Then you had Lady Ella, and you had they were all based on the Renata Levy design.
And what was your boat called?
Kingfisher.
Kingfisher.
It was a very, very well-known boat. Everybody knew it. It was a red boat. They used to call it the red boat. But those days, I mean, we were all very keen. I was part of started off, fishing, sort of charter fishing. It's the only way I could make it pay because I didn't have any money. And my dad, unfortunately, got ill when he built Kingfisher. And just when we were taking delivery, he had a slight stroke and he couldn't go to sea anymore. So I was in a marvelous position. I wasn't even 19. I was just finishing school. And here suddenly Kingfisher was landed in my lap. My dad said, well, we've got the boat. You might as well use it. And by then I was very keen on fishing. So that's how I started.
Okay.
But the only way I could pay for the fuel and everything was to charter the boat. So we chartered it and then I started selling the tuna I caught. Okay. So that began the whole saga of sports fishing, combining it with chartering and then going into commercial fishing, which is a hell of a long story, especially from my point of view.
Yeah,
you ended up with tuna canneries that God knows what of.
Yeah,
I became
the
biggest buyer of tuna in the country. I used to buy tuna everywhere. I used to buy all the catches of Simonstown and the ski boat clubs, which were sometimes 300-400 tons in the season. And then I used to buy the commercial fishing boats, tuna at Hoek Bay, which was 400-500 tons, those days still between everybody. And then Victor Hope of Stella Del Marie from Gansbaai and Red Hawk fished commercially, and they used to net yellowfin and yellowtail, and I used to buy 200-300 tons a year from them. So at the ended up, I was still a youngster, and I used to buy in and sell to all the bigger fishing companies, I&J, Blue Continent, Lusitania, and everybody. And I used to end up marketing, and I was not even 20, 300, 400, 500 tons of tuna a year. Yeah. Buying in at 5 cents, 10 cents a kilo.
5 cents.
Yes, and that's what we got for the bluefin. I got 107 rand for the biggest bluefin. Yeah.
107 bucks.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I would.
You can't even buy a Rapala for
that. I know. And then I would sell to all these various people and make 10, 15 cents a kilo, which was for me at the age of 20 was fantastic. I had plenty of money and I was wheeling and dealing. So I was doing very well. So I left. My dad wanted me to do law. I wouldn't eventually. I left university. I said, bugger that. I'd much rather go fishing and I'd make more money, which I did and I enjoyed it far better, obviously. And
107 bucks.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and
I'm
then-
fixated on that because,
Yeah.
like now in today's time,
I
you can't even
know.
get 5 liters of
Steamer,
fuel.
Yeah, I know. Fuel costs nothing. I owned all the fuel pumps. Eventually I sewed up the whole thing, Simon's down. I realized to get everybody's fish, I have to have their fuel. So Caltex, Mobil all came to me and I took over all the fuel pumps. And if they packers wouldn't sell to me, then I wouldn't give them fuel and they couldn't go out. So it was like a mafia type setup. They used to call me the Godfather.
What a legend. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I
And it
think
worked
that is
like a
brilliant.
charm. And we even did better than that because every now and again, some of the companies like Lusitania and Bluco, suddenly they'd say, why must we buy from Brian? We'll go and buy from the boats direct. So they'd come with their buyers and I'd say the guys, sell to them today. And then you're stuck tomorrow, they're not here. I won't take your fish, you can dump it in the jetty. So I got to be quite well known. And then, as I said, with the fuel, it was a wonderful. We even went further than having the fuel. One day, I'll never forget it. Simon's down there. The I&J was sending a small truck and a buyer, Kenny Hart, through to Simon.
Oh, we know Mr. Hart. Yeah, yeah.
He's dead now.
Yeah.
To buy from me. So the traffic ops in Simonstown were all on my payroll. We gave more. So we set up a roadblock at Glencairn and arrested the guy with the Kenny's guy and the truck coming to buy. So those sort of stories are plentiful.
That is absolutely amazing. Yeah, Mr. Hart, he was also quite
Kenny,
an
so,
iconic.
well, he was a very doer sort of chap. I was very fond of Kenny, but he was a very quiet, and he had a wonderful little way with all the handline fishermen, and he was very successful with them. I was involved in the tuna. That was my forte. And then I ended up buying 1,000 tons a year of tuna. And then, of course, I went from buying and selling tuna. Then I started exporting myself. And then I was renting cold stores all over Cape Town. It was an absolute disaster. Then I bought my own cold store, 500-ton cold store, Blue Cape. Jeez. Then John Church came to me. He was with my dad, had set up a factory for him, a small factory to do abalone. He was the biggest Pillerman diver. In those days, you couldn't give abalone away either. And John started canning in this little section of a garage. My dad said, no, we've got to build a decent factory. And then he had 2 Greek guys come to help him with the canning. And then they came to me and said, look, man, we want to try some tuna. We want to try canning in tuna. But I'd never canned tuna. So they canned a few tons and it started. So my dad said to John, why don't you chuck in your pearl and wood in the factory with Brian, take all his tuna, start a cannery, and you join forces because John was the main pearl and wood guy in South Africa. And I was main guy with tuna. And that's how we came together. And we ended up building Tuna Marine, which ended up employing 500 people, doing a turnover of 30, 40 million a year in the 80s. John, with his pearl and wood, making R1 million a month.
And to put that into perspective, you sold that bluefin for $100.
He's on that.
And then you turn this business into like 30 bar a year.
Yeah.
That's no mean feat. I mean, that is seriously impressive.
And then that is the whole tuna commercial side of the thing from a point of view of building Tuna Marine, the cannery, and all the commercial. But then you've got the American thing I was telling you about earlier that came and charted right in the very beginning and putting up the commercial side. So that then we bought
the pole fleet.
Yeah, then we started with commercial boats, Main, Atlantic. Built a boat called Gladiator. We bought other commercial boats. So I was running a full-on commercial tuna fishing business. I was running a full-on commercial canning business. And I was fishing as a springbok sports fisherman and getting fighting bluefin. So
you're living the dream, man.
I was. And it went on for 30, 40 years. Can you believe it? And people say to me today, Jill said to me, don't you ever want to go on a boat? I said, Jill, I've had enough my whole life. I just want to sit quietly. And then I got involved when I retired from all of that. I went and started farming. So my whole fishing side of my life was over. And it was such a wonderful time. And I'm not just saying so myself, but I did so many things there. And I laid the foundation for so many parts of the fishing industry today. Yeah. And so that's the sort of the The basic picture.
So what are the chances then? And I'm sad to hear you say that. So the chances, I take it, are quite slim then that you're going to come and bust a big yellowfin. Johan and I at Fishtail.
I have a lot of people phone me, but what, you never know. You never know, Nick. Never say never, eh? That's what I always learned to say.
Yeah, man.
But the Bluefin saga specifically in Fisherman was very important to me because I was then only 20 when I was on the boat, and although it was a fantastic thing to do every day to go for these giants, it wasn't a commercial proposition, and I had to still keep the boat going. So we had to sort of one leg be in Fisher's Bay, and the next day we'd have to rush off Cape Point and catch a few fish to pay for the bloody fuel. But I was lucky enough to personally, over 9 years, I caught 42 giant bluefin.
42.
The smallest one was 404 pounds, and the biggest one was 1,047 pounds. And the interesting thing about the big one, over 1,000 pounds, it is in the record books today as the biggest tuna of any kind ever caught in the whole of Africa on rod and reel, but it's only in the record books at 845 pounds. That's an interesting story. I don't know if you want to tell you about it. Well, I'll tell you what happened. We were in fish. I held the previous record of 797 pounds, which I also caught in Fisherman. These are all separate stories. We can sit here all day. But we went into Fisherman that morning. The weather was terribly windy. Southeast was blowing 40 knots, absolute gale. Nobody else went out. And I still said, let's go there for an hour. The bloody seas were breaking when we were lying at anchor, and Fisherman gets very unpleasant in a rough southeaster.
Especially
So I
the
said, we'll try it for an hour and then we'll go in. And we just got there. We started chumming. We normally chum with 25 kg boxes of pilchards a day. That's what we used. We started chumming within 5 minutes. The skipper said, my skipper then was Gabby, Malay skipper, super guy. He said, right, quick, look, bluefin here, right, Jesus. And although it was very rough, you could still see quite easily the transom of the boat made a nice sort of a calm shadow. And sure enough, there were 2 bluefin. And they were, we got excited. And the next thing is, there's a huge bluefin coming, the third one. Jeez, look at the third one. That was good. Anyway, we got all set, and the next thing, my rod went screaming off. There were 2 of us fishing. Bud Toy had his rod. He was a great friend of mine. And that's another story. One-armed fisherman. But my rod went off and I took it, and the bloody bluefin went straight, as often happened, and was disastrous. Because don't forget, we're on anchor.
Yes.
The anchor is on a buoy. We designed a method where we lay, because we couldn't pull the bloody anchor up. By the time we got the anchor up, the bloody line was gone. The fish was off. So my dad designed, we didn't know anything about any overseas, an anchor with a buoy in it. So the moment we got fussed, we'd run to the front and chuck the buoy with the anchor into the water, and the boat was free to chase the bluefin, which worked like a bomb. But every now and again, when a bluefin took at such speed, it goes straight under the bloody boat, and of course, and into the anchor rope, which is a fuck up. Normally you lose the thing quickly. But anyway, my one went straight under the boat, and the weather was shocking, as I said. The RL36s were not very stable. They were designed to, so I had to get around with my rod. In those days, now still, you can't be helped or anything. You've got to do it yourself. Round the whole front and round the bow, and this bloody boat rolling around and back. And I got back into the chair, and our line came free. And the fight was on with this really powerful fish. You could feel it. We knew it was a big fish. I mean, you couldn't tell its size, but it was a big bluefin. And in those days, there were just big bluefin and fucking big bluefin. I mean, they were all big, you couldn't tell that it was a few pounds more. It was just bigger. And off we went, and we battled. I battled for nearly 6 hours. We hooked it in Fisherman, 300 meters from the catwalk.
Yeah.
And eventually, 6 hours later, we got the trace, and we all saw it was a massive bluefin, and we got it off Cape Hunklip, just past between Hunklip and Barney. Yeah. So we saw it was a massive bluefin. So, we couldn't believe it. We said it's over 1,000 pounds for sure. We radioed all of those days. Everybody knew the bluefin. It was a monster bluefin. The whole of Science jetties full of people. But we couldn't get it on board. We used to bring, you asked me, I think, how Americans, we didn't design it, worked what they called a gin pole. It was a block and tackle on the side of the thing, and it was worked in such a way that 2-3 people could do it. And you hook onto a 400 or 500 pound bluefin, and you put the tail rope round and into the gin pole, and you pull, and you can actually get them into the boat. It's a bit of a slip, but you do it. But my God, when we tried to do this big one, it was just a joke. I mean, there were 5 of us on board. You couldn't even get the tail up. And we realized it. So we were only wanting forward at 5, 6 knots. We had to tow it. So we arrived at Simonstown at 6 in the evening virtually. And the whole day battling into that southeaster, cruising at 3, 4 knots. But everybody went berserk. We said, look, we've got a 1,000-pound bluefin. Oh, all excited as anything. And the previous record was held by me, 797 pounds. I said, well, this fish is definitely, I could see, definitely bigger, and broken that record. So about 20 guys on the jetty all got it up onto the Simonstown jetty. We weighed it on the scale, and everybody was dumbstruck, including me. It weighed in at 845 pounds. And Bob Tresfon, who was the chairman of the Bluefin Tuna Club, but a very senior South African Game Fishing Association guy, did the weighing. So he said, well, that's the weight, 845. So I was still pretty chuffed because it broke my record of 797 and was the biggest bluefin ever caught. So we were all happy. But everybody said, that's much bigger. Well, I don't know about the scale, but there you are. But we all went off having drinks and celebrating. And at that time, we had a coal store just off the jetty there. And they put the bluefin overnight into that coal store. And the next morning, early, about 8 o'clock, we were going to go to fishing again. And I was down there. And next thing, David Sussman arrived. He was the chairman of Woolworths, very prominent, important. But David Sussman and Jeff Sonnenberg and Albert van Ret, who used to own the Cathedral Peak in Natal, used to fish every year for bluefin in the Bahamas. So they knew a lot more than we knew about them. And David said, oh, I want to see this giant fish you caught yesterday. So we said, yeah, it's here in the cold store. Yeah, we opened up. And David and Jeff and whatever his name was, Albert van Red, walked in and said, no. Who weighed this fish? We said, at the end of the jetty, Bob, there's no ways. This fish is over 1,000 pounds. Well, we all thought that. Said, that's got to be weighed immediately this morning. Bearing in mind that was the next morning.
Yes.
So we got it through full tilt. We got Blue Continent to send their truck out, and they took it straight through to Blue Continent and was there by about 9 o'clock. Went onto a size scale. They said, we wanted the chap sends a scale of size every day. He had a certificate and put it on the scale, weighed 1,047 pounds.
Yes,
sadly, because they'd registered the bloody thing, Bob Tresford, there was a whole problem. They said, we'll have to put in sworn affidavits and have the other. I said, listen, Christ, I'm happy. I've got the new All Africa record. I caught 1,047. They gave me a certificate from Blue Continent on the scale thing to say. So I said, I'm not going to have an appeal process to make. I said,
yeah, is it really worth it?
I caught 1,047 pound bluefin. Everybody knows it. There's a certificate. If the record says 845, it's still the biggest caught in Africa, and that's how we left it. So that's why there's the discrepancy.
And tell me something, what rods and reels and lines were you guys using? Were you guys using the Dacron then back in those days?
Those days, we were using 12-0 reel, pen.
Yeah.
Ocean City had a bigger one, went up to 14-0. That's from the old days. You probably never heard of the Ocean City reel.
No.
Guns and pigs. And we thought we'd be clever and use that, but it didn't last long. The parts were very hard to get, and it was okay. We went straight onto the Pen 12-0, which held 500 yards, 5 to 600 yards, depending how you put it on, of 130-pound test Dacron. The make of Dacron we used there were different kinds, but the most successful and the most practical, because it wasn't too thick, was called Millwood's Terraline, which was the green Dacron. It was green. And that was the choice of the reels. If you were a wealthy guy and you had we had, which I ended up getting, don't ask me how, a Finor reel. Have you ever heard of Finor? Yeah. Well, we felt Finor 12-0, which changed gears. You could go from 2 to 1 to 1 to 1, which was very useful when the fish was out far, 300-400 meters. You'd use the higher, but when you wanted to pump the trace up, because you could only take the trace, you weren't allowed to touch the leader. You could go down to 1 to 1, get short jerk and pump him up.
Yeah, we refer to it as low range.
Correct. Well, that's what it is. Yeah. So the Finors were few and far between. The Bruno Mercurio, who was a great friend of mine and the most successful in quantity of bluefin, he caught more than me, and he was a wonderful guy and a brilliant bluefin fisherman. He had a Finor as well. He fished from his own boat, Volante. He always fished by himself, never took anybody with him, just himself and his 2 boys, and he caught over 50 bluefin. And but he never held the record. So I always see him as a Bruno, you get quantity, I get quality, you know. And shame, he passed away a couple of years back, but he was a super guy, a good friend of mine, and a great fisherman. I always called him the Bluefin King, you know, which he was. He was a very private sort of a guy. He didn't socialise a lot. People don't know about him today, and they should, because he was a champion.
One of the legends, yeah.
Mm.
And tell me, I remember you were telling me that you would go down in the early stages of this bluefin fishery, you'd go down to like the tidal pools and spray paint lines to see how they'd react in the water.
Well, Nick, yeah, that's interesting, because you know the bluefin, as you said earlier when you were talking about your experiences of Namibia, bluefin can be the most clever, amazing fish. That you get, for argument's sake, 2 or 3 bluefin come under the boat, feeding very graciously and quietly, like porpoise almost. As I say, I touched one once. And you throw the bait over, and you just wait for a minute or so, and they'd come, cruise straight up and take them. And the bait normally was chopped up pilchards or mackerel or whatever. And it was wonderful to watch them feed. But the most incredible thing was the moment you put the bait on the hook, and we used to call it a kop and a stert, a head and a tail. But he's trying to disguise the eye of the hook and the barb. So you put it on. We had a special way of doing it to make it less conspicuous. You chuck it in, and the bluefin would come, and the moment he'd get near it, he'd turn away. And this would go on literally for hours on end, days on end. You'd sit there for a week before you sometimes took one. You could see 3, 4 every day, and you could feed them. We often fed 10, 15 boxes to one bluefin. Not a chance. As soon as you put the one with a hook in, and off they'd go, gone, under the boat, you wouldn't see it. The moment you pulled it in, bang, there they'd come again. So we realized we had to get clever. And there were lots of tricks we used. And I worked out a very clever one. I said, guys, now we're going to be clever. Because the moment this is very interesting, because you'd come with a boat into Hoek Bay from Simonstown, which is only a 10-minute run, put the anchor out, start chumming, and before you even had to chum, you'd put the anchor out, the boat would swing tight into the breeze, and the boys shut, there's the bluefin. They come straight away, waiting for the food, waiting. They knew before you even put a piece of chum in the water. They'd be swimming around waiting like it's coming right up. And if you didn't chum, they'd look and say, what the hell's going on? Where's our breakfast, you know? So I said, we must get clever here. We always then quickly got the lines in, one with a balloon with a whole squid on, and the one on the outrigger, and of course go through the same process there, the bluefin come avoiding the... And then one day I said, you know what we must do? We mustn't put any bait with a hook in the water for the first half an hour. We just chum and get the bluefin to become relaxed, feeding, nothing they must know to be careful of. That worked like a bloody charm. We do that, and the moment you put one with a hook in, it makes a mistake.
Yeah, because he's so relaxed, yeah.
Then, of course, you asked me about, then we realized we've got to also work on some other plan, the bloody wire trace. You always had a 7-strand wire trace.
Okay.
But it was fairly conspicuous in the water. And I said, what about changing the color of this bloody silver traces that it's not so obvious? Let the water's green or blue, or let's try and discuss. So I ended up going and swim at Glenken Pool. My mother used to go there, and I used to watch there because she felt a bit insecure swimming, so I used to watch for her. So I took all of these traces and paint, and I used to go into the water while my mom was, and I used to dangle them all in 10 or 12 different colors and see which one, and I'd go with my goggles on which one was the less, and that also helped a lot. I won't say it was as successful as the other, but it did help. And eventually we got a lime green with after southeaster when the water was churned up, that one was the right one, or if it was clear water and the light blue. So yeah, that was another trick we used and also worked quite successfully.
It must have been quite something to just see those things swimming on the back of your boat and just to, I don't know, just see them swimming, let alone hook one.
If I tell you I spent 9 years looking at them every day, and as I go to sleep many a night, I have my scotch here at 5. I'll tell you, when I close my eyes, I relive this so often, and I can see them as I talk to you now. I mean, I told you one day I leaned out and I actually patted the back of the bluefin, and the guys on board saw it. That it was unbelievable. But I'll tell you another funny story which you'll enjoy. It's not quite. We had an old pompous old guy called Major Bert Gandy. He had a boat, he was a super guy, but he was very one of these lardy-da old ex-British India colonels or majors. You know, he was real old pomp, and he had loved sports fishing, and he had jackets with all the bloody badges. We always say, have you got a badge on the end of your bloody dick there with the bloody in your underpants, you know. Anyway, very lardy-da, but he was a nice old chap. One day he said, I'm going to catch a bluefin with a bow and arrow. I said, shit, are you talking now, Bert? No, he's going to. I said, don't be ridiculous. He gets a bow and arrow, and he takes the trace and ties the arrow onto the rod and reel. Now he's going to shoot the arrow into the bluefin, and then it's going to go off of the thing, and then it's going to go onto the reel, and then he's going to have it. Can you imagine? So he now goes ahead and he tries this. He easily shot the bluefin, because you didn't have to be bloody Robin Hood to shoot the thing at 2 meters away. It's easy. But of course, it always, with the strength of the bluefin, it always tears off. So he got officially reprimanded by the Bluefin Tuna Club, by the chairman, to say unsportsmanlike, and they nearly bloody expelled him from the club. But he hooked about 15 or 20 of them doing
By
that.
shooting them.
Yeah, yeah.
And tell me, was there a certain time of the year that you'd catch
Yes,
these fish?
most definitely. I know that. Always from last week in November to the first week in December, they'd arrive. You could set your watch. And we'd find out very simply. We lived at Sunny Cove, overlooking Fisher Bay. And my dad always, at 5 o'clock, always enjoyed having a scotch and soda out on the balcony. And okay, lots of times in fishing, mostly it was blowing a howling southeaster. But a few days when it was calm, we'd sit there. My mom would join us. I was there. And you could listen to the mackerel on top of the water in Fisher. The whole of Fisher Bay was alive at sunset, swishing like that as they go on top. And then we'd sit there and say, my dad would say, well, 3rd of December, any moment now they're going to come. No, nothing yet, nothing yet. Next thing, 2, 3, that's there, and there's like a bomb, like a depth charge going on. Wow, the water just explodes. I mean, we were 200-300 meters from my house.
Yeah.
And you'd see the bluefin come clean out of the water with it, chasing a squid, into the air. There, straight away. Get the boats ready. Tomorrow we're off, boys. Then everybody would tell everybody. And that would be one way we'd know. And the other way would be the commercial fishermen from Cork Bay trying for bait would shout, oh, the bluefin are here. Everybody would know, like a telegram. So, yeah, first week in December was always the beginning of the water depth. We used to anchor always between 8 and 10 fathoms.
Yeah, I recall you said that that was vital, that depth of water.
Amazing thing, and I can't answer, and I'll tell you why. If you weren't exactly on your spot, and we used to mark the spot with the train station and the bloody house behind it and the telephone pole, really, and if you weren't on your spot, you'd very often sit the whole day and you wouldn't see one bluefin.
But move a couple of 100 meters. And
they come from the bloody, from Massachusetts, I explained to you earlier on, and you couldn't get 20 meters away, it wouldn't work. Don't know why.
And now, on that note, you were saying they came from Massachusetts. Now, there were so many routes.
Not necessarily all from out. I caught one for sure that was it, yeah.
But, and just for those watching, Uncle Brian was saying that they caught a bluefin and noticed a hook in the mouth.
Correct.
And took that hook out, and
Correct.
that was the mustard hook.
Correct.
Which was traced back to Massachusetts, where
they're busy now with the wicked tuna.
Yes, yeah.
And that bluefin, fortunately the hook had some kind of registration thing on it, and Mustad said, look, give us a few weeks, which they did, and they traced it. They actually found the guy who bought the hook. That's how clever they were. In 2 years before, I caught that very same bluefin. It weighed 518 pounds in Fisher Bay. He lost it 2 years before.
So, based on that, what is your take on this? Because
100 tons every night into Fisher Bay, and this went on not for 1 season or 2 seasons. It went on for 3, 4, 5 seasons, and we watched. They were literally raping the bay. And as they carried on with this, it was illegal. Nobody could stop them. Everybody went, but they were all controlled in those days. It's similar to the ANC today, but anyway, I won't comment there. But we watched the shoals of bluefin coming into Fisher get less and less. We'd often see a good day in Fisher, you'd see 20 or 30 bluefin, which were mostly different. While I was seeing 10 under my boat, Bruno would be seeing 5 under his boat, and so on. So we knew there were. It got less and less and less, and eventually I said, well, unfortunately, I think they're not going to come anymore. I actually caught the last one in Fisher Bay in 1973. The last one ever caught. One fish came under the boat all by itself. I hooked it and I caught it. Weighed 500 and something. There's a picture of it there. That was the last bluefin ever to have been seen or caught in Fisher Bay from 1973 to today. And in my opinion, you could talk about the currents and the different, okay, but that wasn't the cause. The bluefin, whenever we opened them up or packed full of anchovies, squid, and mackerel. That was their food, and that's why they came here. And once it was taken out of here, they never came back. And that, in my opinion, is clearly the cause of what happened.
But
I don't think you'll ever see them back again.
You don't?
No.
Because
you're going to Fisherman Bay today, you're lucky if you catch 2 bloody mackerel. If you're lucky.
Having said that, the last 3 or 4 years, when I grew up fishing here in this area, now I bought kahora from Earl, Grandpa. I didn't catch mackerel. I didn't know that the guys of recent years caught mackerel. I knew Grandpa told me about the Persainers and how they try to fight against them.
I'm lucky I'm an uncle, so poor Earl's a grandpa.
Yeah, exactly. You see, you're winning here.
Earl's a pal of mine for 40 years, I know.
Yeah, no, Earl's very much our fishing grandpa. He taught a lot of the youngsters.
Give him all my best wishes.
I certainly will do, Grandpa, if you're watching. But what I was getting at is that when I was growing up and fishing, we didn't catch the mackerel. And then the last couple of years, we've started to see mackerel again.
Yeah.
And then just before I bought kahora from Grandpa, I'm sorry, Grandpa, I'm going to drop you in the shit here. He told Helen that he was going to go and refuel kahora.
Yeah.
And he drove around Sunny Cove. And on his way to Simonstown, he saw some birds working and he saw some splashing off of Sunny Cove. And he thought it was yellowtail. So at the ripe old age of 70, he jumped onto kahora, buggered the fuel, took her out himself. It's a 28-foot bucket.
Yeah.
You know, for an older gentleman, with respect, it's no mean feat, but off he goes. And Grandpa caught 9 yellowfin.
Really?
Yeah, he threw his spinning rod out, thought it was yellowtail, went on, realized very quickly,
well, that's interesting because I don't know if you saw that video about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. There was 2 guys in a canoe came out from the dockyard and said, "Did you see that?" And they came rushing to me. They said, "The bluefin are back. We've got this. We want you to check the video." And they came and showed me this. They all thought, and it was really impressive. The guy was on the canoe taking, but they were yellowfin.
Yeah.
Look, never say never. I'm saying, in my opinion, I don't think, but things can change. Overall, you can't say that you might get them again. I mean, my dad in Sally, there's a picture hanging in my room, went down to Seal Island and he caught 45 yellowfin in one afternoon, trolling. Seal Island, between the Hasty and Seal Island.
Seal Island to go and catch yellowfin.
45 yellowfin. There's a picture hanging above my bed, Joel. All caught off between the Hasty and... It was nothing. My Reggie Biggs scored 156-pound yellowfin off the bluefin, off the bullnose.
It's
on a spinner.
I keep saying this. I was born in
my dad used to take visiting friends out in his little boat Doreen before Sally. It was a 25-foot little talkie. And he said, "Want to catch a red stem, Ross?" No problem. He used to start work in his office in Simonstown as an attorney at 9 o'clock. They used to go out at 6. He said, "I've got to be back 8:30 to get to my office." Come back with 40 or 50 big red stem Ross. Good. You want to catch 100 red stem Ross, you can spend the morning there. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just mind-blowing that this bay offered such amazing fishing.
If you could see the bay today compared to the bay, and even before my time, I'm talking my dad's time. I mean, nobody ever heard of coming in without... The Simonstown jetty used to be covered in geelbeck and cob, and used to go to the places at the lighthouse. At you would never know all these names. Blue gums, we used to call it. Buckwind. We used to come back, go there, and nothing, come back with 50 geelbeck anytime we wanted to. Beautiful big geelbeck, what a Cape salmon we call a geelbeck. Average of 10, 15 kilos, no problem, Yeah. The bay
I was just trying to think of when last I've caught a geelbeck here in this bay.
Unfortunately, the bay was starting off by those commercials. It was eventually like a garden, Jules, a gardener. You rip out everything by the roots. Roots eventually is going to be nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. They took everything out of here. And it was a great shame. But as you said, you never know. I mean, with the currents change, and you might get the mackerel come again. Yeah. But I would personally be amazed if they came back into fishing. But I can't say never say never.
It would be quite something if they did make a comeback.
We always had a bluefin in Fisherman Bay called Scarface, as you had your one up on the...
Yeah,
we knew him well. But we knew it was a monster bluefin. You know, as I said before, you can't tell the weights, but you can tell there's a moose bluefin this way. And he had a big scar on his side. It was very easy to identify. I mean, for 2-3 seasons, he came back every time, but nobody could ever hook him. And we had a hell of a good friend of mine. It was a big Free State rugby player, Boet du Toit, very strong. He ended up a Springbok fisherman and a very good fisherman. But he was on his farm one day and he was going to take a turn in his bucky and the bloody car went past him and took his arm clean off. Anyway, that didn't stop him. He became a fantastic angler with one arm. There's a picture of him there with a bluefin under the boat. I'll show you this. Anyway, he was fantastic and he never caught a bluefin. But one day the scarbait came under the boat and we were all excited and carrying on basically, but we didn't have much hope because he was too clever for us. But sure enough, he took Boet's line. 6:30 in the morning as the day was coming out. And Boet was in and we were off and I said, Boet, if you get this fish, boy, you're going to be more famous than Frank Sinatra because this is the tuna of tuna, boy. And our Boet's in and this thing was bloody strong, going every 300-400 meters every time it would run out. Boet was very good with one arm and make no error, it was no disadvantage. He had the same kind of fishing ability as anybody. And this went on all morning. Bearing in mind, we hooked it about 6:30 in the morning. 11:45, poor old Boet, we were pouring bloody bottles of water and lemonade. Eventually, I think somebody poured him a bloody whiskey that we tried to keep him. But eventually, I mean, he was a huge striker. He said, look, I can't carry on. I've had it. I said, I don't blame you, Boet. Crush, he said, I must take over. I said, no, Crush, I'm going to take over. We had a big, strong guy, Rolf van der Merwe in those days. He was a Springbok fisherman, a good fisherman, a big guy, bigger than you. Strong. He said, look, fuck this thing up quickly, let me get in there. So he gets in there now, 12, poor old Boet. We get him down the cabin, he's just about gets on the bunk, he's about dead. Can't blame him, he's up this thing hours and hours. And old Boet Rolf gets stuck into this bloody bluefin and crushed. By 4:00, 4:30, he said, get me out, I can't go anymore, and he's fucked completely. So we got another guy there, we put him in there. Cut a long story, and we never saw the bluefin at all, never got it near. Right near the end, the bluefin came right near the boat and it came out of the water, almost reminded me of Moby Dick. And we all, there it is, and you could see his huge scar. Oh, the boys saying, it's 2,000 pounds, you know, with the Malaysia. I said, it's not that, but it's the biggest tuna ever. We had it on for 17.5 hours, 3 anglers, and as the trace came up and we had gaffs, I don't know what, the bloody thing parted. We lost it. How's that?
No, 17 and a half.
17. I think it was 16 though. I've got it in my diary. Can you believe it? We got back to Samstown, I tell you, everybody we couldn't even get out the boat. We couldn't get up on the jetty. We were all fit, even though I didn't involve myself. I couldn't, you were physically wrecked. We couldn't believe it. And that was also, we never saw it again after that. But can you imagine? Look, it was certainly over 1,000 pounds. I'm not saying it was bigger than the one I caught. It could have been.
How long did your 1,000 pounder take?
5.5 hours.
5.5?
Yeah.
It's 5.5 to 17.5 hours. That is
But there were many sagas. Lots of other boats had them 6, 7, 8, 10 hours and lost them. And, you know, there were so many stories I could tell you. I mean, we could tell you stories forevermore. Guys going to be pulled. Another guy was pulled overboard with a bluefin on and all. Off he went into the bloody water, strapped in. Luckily, we got it all back, but that's another story. You know, these stories are so important to tell. Now, Zane Grey has written so many books which are collector's items in all the 1920s, 1930s. And, you know, my dad was always so pissed off. He said, you've got 25 pages. He'd tell you about this fight with the bluefin. And the next page, and they're getting it nearer. And the next page, it's run out again. And the next page. And right at the end, just one sentence, it says, and then the line snapped. Chapter 4, my dad is so pissed off. He spent the whole bloody day, and then the line snapped. Now, next chapter. But that's what he was like, you know. This is the same sort of thing, really.
Absolutely. No, this has been absolutely amazing. I mean, for me, growing up in this industry, my parents went into the fishing at all. My dad was in the Navy, but they called him a dumduiker because if he stood in a jetty, he'd get seasick. You know, my mum took me fishing to catch my first clipfish when I was a little laatlammetjie, you know, and
just sort of manifested from there. And for me, there's so many, what I've realized of late, there's so many kids in the same position as me that have fallen in love with the ocean and fishing and wanting to be involved and watch videos like this and learn and listen and just fantasize about the stories. But there's not enough people sharing this.
You see, this is the problem is also with you young guys today, Nick, is we don't have that kind of fishing anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, wicked tuna is fantastic and everything, but as Jill correctly pointed out, it's still ongoing all the time. You know, so, but our fishing here, unfortunately, is deteriorated to such an extent. We are still lucky. You've still got good tuna fishing off Cape Point, but false bay per se, and even the tuna off Cape Point, nothing like we used. I mean, somebody the other day wanted me to check out a bluefin. It was a southern bluefin, school bluefin. In 1977 and 78, we had the biggest run of southern bluefin you could ever imagine off Cape Point. 10 miles off Cape. We would go out every day and catch 50 bluefin every day on the boat. Every single day. You fill the boat every time. All school bluefin averaging between 15 and 25 kilos. As much as you want. You wouldn't even see a yellowfin. They didn't get a chance to take on the bloody lure. There were so many bluefin. And this went on for 2-3 years, never gone. Never saw another one.
And yet again, these southern bluefin are something that is, for us, we are starting to see them more and more now.
You never know.
It was what, Joe, like 2 or 3 years ago. I got that one on
yeah, they're catching a few now. The guys got one at Hout Bay, about 100 kilos, 80 kilos. Yeah, but these are all school bluefin, the smaller juveniles. They're all 15. You never got one over 25, 30 kilos. You know.
Did you ever eat any of those giant bluefin that you caught?
Yeah, we didn't know what the hell they were. No, got rid of them. We've got such a high price, we couldn't get rid of them fast.
What, a whole 107
grand?
Yeah, I'm still local.
Yeah, we used to say we'd have to can, you eat all you can and you can't. But no, we didn't. In those days, we used to cut up a yellowfin and we didn't prepare it properly. We didn't realise that you couldn't. We used to fry it. Can you imagine? It's the worst thing you can do with a bloody yellowfin. It's too dry.
Yeah.
But no, we didn't. Sashimi we'd never heard of. We didn't know anything like that.
And ice, I suppose, and cleaning and reaming. It was just...
And our tuna condition, such shit. When I used to buy, we used to can that. We used to make fish paste out of all the frog tuna. Those days, paying 10 cents a kilo, who the hell cared? Half were frogged, half weren't. I mean, it didn't matter. We had the Greek guys we had at the factory started making fish paste out of the frog ones. And then we made dark meat tuna, you know, and our light meat tuna was the most. I mean, if you go in Pick and Pay or Checkers today and you buy a solid pack of tuna, I wouldn't have fed that to the dogs. Our tuna marine solid pack of tuna of longfin albacore was that colour, a solid block of pure white, magnificent tuna. Yellowfin, which was also a solid pack, it's not as good. It wasn't the prime quality like the longfin, but yellowfin was also a solid pack of beauty. You go today and you get flake tuna. It's just like toothpaste. It's just a disgrace, which is basically skipjack, which has all been fucked up. And you get solid pack, which has not even got a lump of tuna in like it's a disgrace.
Yeah, it's amazing how things change.
We called our flake tuna, we called it our fluck tuna. It's all flucked up. We used to take all the burnt out old tuna and just make flake tuna. Nobody knew them. And then they said, well, you could taste something. I said, well, fine, so we just put curry in and make a curried flake tuna. And it was our best seller for years. But longfin, albacore, pure white, I wish I could have kept. I've never kept any of it.
And tell me something, do you enjoy eating your fish? Well, I mean, like, if we bring you some yellowfin.
Yeah, well, there's my chef. See, we got tuna a while back, didn't we? It was absolutely wonderful. Yeah, I never get it. I never thought I'd have to go and buy a blade. If I went to the harbour and bought a tuna, I've given so many tuna in my life away. I mean, you know.
But then the guys that are watching, you know, Uncle Brian's here in Fish Hoek. So, I mean, there we go. We can thank him. Stop by, drop off tuna.
But, you know, as I say, just to finish, it's so great that we can have this chance to share these stories for the youngsters today. And really, when they drive past Fish Hoek or go past Fish Hoek, just stop and observe a minute's silence and look out on that bay. And just imagine that was the stage of wicked tuna. And I call it our very own wicked tuna.
Yeah. Grandpa hooked one with his father. They fought for, I think, 5.5, 6 hours.
I remember his dad well. He had his glasses on.
And they dropped it up at Roy Grant's. They dropped that fish there. That was also a disaster. The fighting chair that Grandpa's dad designed didn't allow for it to swivel far
Nick,
enough.
if you could know the stories of disaster about the Fisher Bay Bluefin, the guys could have told you stories here. It was everybody would gather on the jetty after we came in, and there'd just be all the sad stories. No Bluefin. Oh, what happened to you? What happened to you? Well, everybody's hands all cut and their bloody tears running. Head for the bloody pub and just drown your sorrows.
Exactly.
Every day, day in and day out. And then, we had celebrities come. I mean, Chris Barnard came. It's in the book. That's all there. Yeah. He didn't. Well, he hard fought one. It's in the stories in the book.
So what did he just not have the stamina to finish one?
Well, when he did I knew Chris very well, but when he did his heart transplant, he became the main one. He loved the press and the limelight, and then he phoned me up. And the right thing to do in those days, Fisher Bay was the in place to catch a bluefin. Dr. Verwoerd caught one on Speranza too, and Chris wanted it. So I said, "All right, come, we're going to try for a bluefin again." And lo and behold, we hooked a bluefin, and Chris was fighting it for quite a while, but understandably, and I must be honest, he couldn't. He said he had very bad arthritis, but he was very worried because his hands were his main. So I took over in the end. We got the bluefin, and I said, right, we go halves in it, half each. So he was all very happy and everything. But shame, I couldn't blame him. He felt that his hands were so important to him. And strangely enough, towards the latter part of his life, arthritis crippled him. So, but there were a lot of other well-known people. Dr. Verwoerd, as I say, at that time, a very old toppie, which is a great feat, caught one on Speranza, 400 and something pounder.
It's a lovely size fish.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Speranza is still there in Simonstown, still floating, and she's in magnificent
I saw
condition.
it for sale a while back.
Is it?
Yeah. Speranza was the queen of the fleet for so many years, and the Hare brothers, who were dear friends of mine, the most wonderful people, and very well known in fishing and angling circles. They did well with the bluefin. They never caught a record bluefin, but they caught quite a few nice big bluefin, all in the 500-600 pound category. And
and Jeremy then carried on that lineage with Taranami and the things that he achieved in the modern day commercial tuna fishing industry. I think we definitely gonna, in time to come, have a sit down with Jeremy and have a chat with him. I mean, that man's also got some amazing stories to tell. But I think after you, we need to have a chat with Grandpa.
Grandpa, shame well ill.
Now you know that Sam Brown took Grandpa to sea in Strays Bay last week or the week before on Sam's 620 Supercat.
Really?
So Grandpa's still at it.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. How old is he now?
I'm actually 70.
Yeah, well, I'm 74. That's my age. Yeah. Not for much longer, but I'm 74. But I've just ran, I told you.
6Ks today.
Yeah, there's 2 treadmills upstairs. I run. Jules would run as well. She runs.
No, man, then there's no excuse. Fishtail.
And at 5 o'clock, I pour my scotch. It will scrick for nix, that I promise you.
There we go.
A treble scotch every night at 5. I keep going.
That's it. Keeps the
But often I sit here, and I sit here in that chair, that old clapped out chair. I like it because it's comfortable. I don't care what it looks like. And I have my scotch, and if something go all quiet, I don't even turn the TV as we are now. Just shut my eye, think back on all the giant blues. And I've got so many stories I tell myself, It's unbelievable. An hour goes before you know it. Your drop was finished, the glass empty, And then occasionally I have to go and pour another one if it's really serious. Our old pal always say, we better have another one just in case of fire.
There we go. But serious, Fishtails, she's a big girl, she's a big boat, she's a comfortable cat.
Really, eh?
Yeah. There's a lounging chair there for you, and
Jesus, don't say that.
4 strokes, and there's plenty of
Nick,
whiskey.
In my day, if you said to me you're coming fishing and anything, Nick de Kock, Nick?
Yes, of course.
Nick's in the book here. I took Nick from the jetty when he didn't know one end of a fish from another. I trained Nick. He'll tell you all
and
about
look at
me.
him now. Look at the things Mr. de Kock has designed in terms of lures and the stuff. You see, there's so many legends here. Yeah, there he is.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting with Nick de Kock. I've fished for Stephen Cameron Dow.
Yeah.
Nick de Kock's daughter is married to Stephen
Really?
Cameron Dow, and Stephen owned Malachite, that's
Well,
76.
well, you know who's doing very well is Tom, his son.
Yes.
In tuna broking all over the world. He phones me often for advice. I give him a lot of advice on the phone, you know. And I keep saying to
We
him,
need
Tom,
to get a copy of this, and you need to read this this one. You need to get it.
Tom would phone me and ask me, Brian, I said, Tom, you must remember I've been out of the industry for a good few years now. You know, I can't give you all your answers that you need. He's sitting in Taiwan or something and he wants to know this parcel of tuna. Super guy, Tom. But Nick, I started off on the jetty in Sound. He'll tell you, before he'd even caught a fish in his life before. But what I was going to say, if you said to me you want to bring a pal fishing on kingfisher, and I'd say, yeah, well, what's he reasonably? I mean, we don't take any bloody, you know, we're going out there to fill the boat with fish. No, he's a chap, you know, he's reasonably okay. If you said to me he's a chap of 70, I would have said, are you fucking mad? There's an old age home in Fisher called Carlisle Lodge. Don't bring any old dwarfs. Are you crazy? Yeah. And here I am when I'm shaving at the crust. Who said, old fucker looking at me as me? If you'd asked me to go on your bloody boat, I would have said, you mad. Well, that's what I'm like.
Yeah.
You know, you tell me a lovely, comfortable chair for me. Guys, it makes me feel terrible. Somebody said that to me.
No, man. We've got to take the legend out again. We've got to do one more.
On the way out, the fish were going berserk. I think Henny will tell you, Henny Kraus, you know Henny. The fish were going berserk about 20 miles. And on the way out, the day before, Shane, a ski boat had capsized and the blokes drowned. And they were all supposed to look out. They were missing 2 bodies. I think Nick will tell you he was there. Anyway, we were just past Bellows. There's the oil skins. There's Christ, there's a bloody body floating there. Meantime, the radio's going, folks, 18, 20 miles, 270. Fish are on the biting already. They're all, here we got to fish this bloody body out now. Oh, we're going to bring it back. That we're not going to bring. I said, we told nobody on the radio. We opened up the fish box, that big fish box. We chucked the body in with the oil. I'll never give it the oil skins. And Nick was saying, oh, but I want to go. John Marsh was there. He was also. We put the. We fished the whole day. We caught about 100 fish. We came back. We told them we picked it up on the way back. This bloke was lying there. That's not in the book, by the way. John Marsh, you know John Marsh, we called him the mad thing, you know John. He's old now, he's in his 80s. He's, I'm not going in the cabin, I'm not coming out, I'm going to, you go downstairs and he's sitting there looking, I'm not coming out of here until that body's gone. I said, we put it in the tanks now, the lid's on, you can't even see it, John. I said, a big guy like you, you're scared of a dead person, man. I was never... That's one thing, Nick. I was never a light tackle guy. I always wanted to get the fish in as fast as possible. I used to cuck on these guys. What's his name? The Christie brothers, Mark Christie. Do you know Mark?
Yes.
Big, strong Mark. He wanted to go. Comes one down Kingfisher. He's using 20-pound line, and the bloody fish are going berserk down to yellowfin. Mark's going. I said, Mark, piss off. Go sit in the bow and fight that thing. We're busy. We don't. But an hour and a half later, his poor Mark still carrying on. Eventually, to give up. Don't ever tell him about that. He gave up on that. Nearly killed him. And often when I see Mark, I don't speak to him anymore. He often says, remember that time that yellowfin that light tackle? He couldn't walk for 3 days. But I was never a light tackle guy. No, I always believed in bringing it in fast as possible. Keep it to the egg purpose for record purposes. That's about sports fishing. If I was poling or something, Robin Mills, there was Henny Kraus and Nick always tell you, ask Nick to tell you the story. We were poling and Robin Mills, he's the auctioneer, he got in my way. No, not Robin, another guy. Anyway, he got a hook through my hook from my pole through his foot, and he was hovering around, and all I was worried about is getting my hook out of his foot to get back into the tuna. Were going berserk, the longfin, they were all blue going mad. And here's poor Robin, I'm ripping, and Henny and Nick are shouting, Christ, you're going to rip the poor guy's foot off. And then I went to carry it. I started carrying the thing together. They always laugh about that. To this day, poor Robin walks out with it. I wonder what was wrong with him, you know.
That's like it. No. Come on, give it some thought. And when you're ready, Fishtails is ready.
I trust you enjoyed that video. I tell you, it was such an amazing experience to sit with Uncle Brian Cohen and get to hear his account of this historical fishery firsthand. I tell you, I left there with boonerd face. It was unbelievable. I absolutely loved the time I got to spend with him. Uncle Brian, thank you so much for doing this with us and allowing us to tell your story and share it with those that are unable to come and sit with you. Remember, Uncle Brian does have a book out. Please feel free to get in touch and we can get you one of Uncle Brian's books. Thank you so much for this. Behind the scenes, we've been chatting about this, and we couldn't think of a better way to commemorate this old school fishery by saying, you know what, let's go back a bit in time. If we manage to get 10,000 likes on this video, what we're going to do is we're going to get hold of some of that old school gear that they used to target these giants, the old Pen 49s and the 12-0s and the old broomsticks that they used, and we're going to go and see if we can smash some yellowfin, paying homage to the old school legends. So if you want to see that happen, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share with your mates. If you want, let us know what you guys would like to see going forward. We've got some really cool people that we're going to chat with in the next few videos that are on their way. Remember, your adventure starts here with us at Fish Tales. We look forward to hearing from you. Take care. All the best.